how does the story end?
Wow. Cut right to the chase. Well, I listen. Predictions are cheap and lame, and yet we do them in this industry all the time. But usually only when someone forces me to. I don't want to predict anything, but I will just say, are the Sixers now a much better contender, stronger contender, better shot to win a championship than they were a few weeks ago before Paul George? Yes. This might be the best team they've had around Joel Embiid since he arrived and since he became this version of Joel Embiid, a guy who's a perennial MVP candidate and a guy who I know, when healthy, uh, can elevate any team to contender. They had a nice version of the Sixers a few years back when Ben Simmons was still uh, a good player, and when Jimmy Butler was there, and they made a bad decision. They kept Tobias Harris and let Jimmy Butler go, and they just really haven't been able to get to the same heights since. I think Paul George is the perfect fit. Like if you had drawn it up, you don't get to choose who free agents are going to be in a given summer, right? When you have cap room or when you're trying to plan for your summer as an NBA team, as a GM, you can't just say, oh, ideally, we'd love to have this guy. It doesn't work that way. But Paul George is actually the ideal fit between Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. And the Sixers are actually, I think it's not even hyperbolic or controversial to say they're the big winners of the summer by getting Paul George. So yes, now we go to can Paul George in his mid-30s stay healthy? Can Joel Embiid, who has an injury history, stay healthy? If so, though, those two plus Maxey and a really nice supporting cast, a lot of whom were brought back from last season, I think it makes them, at minimum, among the challengers to the Celtics in the East, and probably the strongest challenger to the Celtics in the East, with all due respect to the Knicks and the Bucks and anyone else who wants to put themselves in that conversation.
And the Clippers, how are they feeling watching him walk away? I mean, I went through that building, by the way. That building is sensational. It is. Yeah. Have you been in there yet?
No. Can't wait to see it.
There is not a bad seat in the entire stadium. In fact, I went and sat in the very highest seat in the worst corner possible. And I would do anything to watch a game from there. I've never seen a building like it. It's quite sensational. So how is it for the Clippers to watch him walking away and looking so happy and talking about brotherly love, etc.?
This is tough, right? I will still say, and I know, like on balance, on paper, the record suggests that the Kawhi Leonard, Paul George experience was a bust for the Clippers, that this was a failure. And I get that. When you don't advance out of the first round, I think maybe more than once, when you don't get to the finals at all, when you don't win a championship after all that went with that, I get it. Yes, as a basketball matter, you can say that the era was a failure. But I would say that we need to remember who the Clippers were for most of their history, obviously mostly in the Donald Sterling years, which were, in fact, Donald Sterling decades. They were a laughingstock for a very long time. It changed during the Blake Griffin, Chris Paul era. But up until 2019, no one had ever chosen the Clippers. Superstars were not choosing the Clippers. Kawhi Leonard choosing the Clippers and saying, I'm coming if you can get Paul George also. It's going to take a boatload of stuff to pull this off. They did it. They became a destination. We look at the Clippers differently now. So it's a mixed bag how we evaluate those 5 years. And for the Clippers themselves, I imagine, Suzy, it's kind of the same. They must have some really mixed feelings. They're far ahead in terms of their image and their profile. And now with this, as you just described, beautiful new arena opening up in the fall, they're in a much better place. And so they lost Paul George, and they chose to lose him, frankly. Let's be clear about it. They could have kept him if they were willing to go the distance in terms of dollars and years. And LA, Southern California, was home for him. It's one of the reasons he wanted to be there in the first place. Losing him is not great, especially when you had the means to keep him. And it's the first time since Steve Ballmer took over that franchise that he has actually decided not to spend every last dollar it took. They made a choice, and I get it. It's tough being so heavily invested in two guys in their mid-30s, both with injury histories, and given the results that they've had. But still, to be very, very clear, they have taken a step backwards in losing Paul George. They did a nice job in picking up some other pieces to supplement, but if they were a plausible contender before, I think they're now, clearly no better than a second tier to third tier team in the West, and the West is stacked. So I'm curious where they go from here. I think they left themselves some flexibility by not re-signing Paul George, by not going into the so-called second apron, by not just tying themselves up for years in two guys who were in their, not even late primes. They're in their twilights potentially. So they made the right move on some level as a pragmatic, matter. But where they go from here, how they pivot over the next couple of years is what I'm curious about.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.